Hello, everybody. I am so glad that you're able to join us today. I'm Kate Boyle Ramsdell from the class of 97. I'm honored to serve as your president of our Society of Alumni. So thanks for being here today for the Zoomcast with President Mandel. Our conversation today, as always, will offer us a chance to hear from Maud. She'll share her perspective on campus life as it's existing in this moment. Talk a little bit about the ongoing implementation of our strategic plan. She's going to talk about a handful of topics that she's identified as being important to illuminate and things that we should know a little bit more in terms of what's happening at Williams. And then we're going to open up the conversation to your questions. And I just would feel remiss not to share that, and I understand this, particularly as we've gathered over the past couple of years. And this is probably true of every moment in time, but we're gathering again during a really challenging geopolitical conflict. And so if you or your loved ones or anyone you know in the Eve family outside of it are being impacted by what's unfolding in the Ukraine, please know that we're holding you close. And as we get into the conversation today, I'd like to share a couple of reminders to you about how we'll navigate it. You're going to use the chat as a space to introduce yourself, which a lot of you are doing right now, and that's wonderful. You can share any reflections you have about what are being said, what's being said by Maud, or what's being considered in your questions. If you do have questions that you haven't already submitted for Maud, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar at any time. And once we get through the beginning part of our time together, I will help to call and share questions from the audience, and Maud will share her thoughts on those as well. So with that, we're going to get started. Maud, it's so good to be with you again. Thank you for being with us. Yeah, it's interesting. You're in the fourth year of your presidency. And so if you were a student at Williams, you would be a senior, and you would be in your second semester. And I don't have maybe strong memories, or perhaps they're too rose-colored, but memories of my senior year. But I remember getting to a stage where I was, I think, pretty reflective on my time, and also looking forward to what was ahead of me. So I would love to start by asking you to share what you've reflected on for the past 4 years of your presidency. What do you think about? You've accomplished a lot given the context of the pandemic. And the fact that it's dominated a lot of the last 2 years, but I would love to hear more about what you're proud of as you consider your presidency so far.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful question. I keep thinking it's true. I think of myself a little bit like a senior, although I'm a little bit worried what that makes me, a non-graduating senior as I go forth after this year. So, of course, I came to Williams in 2018, really excited to get to know the community. And we spent the first year doing just that. And of course, traveling to meet alumni and doing lots of events and launching that 2-year strategic planning process, which I'll come back to in a minute to talk about. And the whole early period was really characterized by getting to doing significant outreach to faculty, staff, students, alumni, townspeople, et cetera, with the goal of announcing a very exciting strategic plan at the end of 2020 and moving into this, what one might think of as the second phase of a presidency, the operationalization of a plan and its implementation. And of course, in March of 2020, everything changed rather dramatically. And with the pandemic hitting, slowed some things down. So the simple arc of a presidency was disrupted from a planning perspective. Of course, we were delayed by a year, but I'm happy to say we got back on track and we're able to publish our plan in September of 21. And I'll talk a bit more about some of the things we've done out of that in a minute. But I think it is worth thinking about the way the pandemic also disrupted lots of other things as we think about the last 4 years. In some ways, it was as simple as the rethinking of the most basic parts of the academic calendar and putting at the core how to get back as quickly as possible to our core mission, which of course is educating students in person on the Williams campus. But we really had to think so many things over and over again, how to offer courses, where we work, how we make decisions, how we communicate those decisions. And really the everyday operations of running a college took a central position in a way I've never seen in my life in higher education. It was a very different period of time. I'm happy to say we seem to be coming out of that, even if Omicron was a bump in the road here on campus. Even just today, in light of the CDC guidelines, we've been able to do another round of relaxing masking guidelines. We're not completely unmasked yet, but we're definitely heading in that direction. And it's really was thanks to the tremendous Williams community, the operational lift, the restructuring work by faculty, the students' overwhelming compliance with years of restrictions on their lives and educations. And I was just incredibly proud to be part of that collective effort. And of course, we're going to be, over the long term, thinking about what the impact of all of this is on many ways we do business, for those who work and study here, for the core aspects of a residential liberal education, and how we can use certain lessons to reach some of our goals, things like sustainability, just the change in travel, for example, and how it affected sustainability goals. So that really has affected, if you will, my junior and senior year, because we had to rethink so many things. But you asked me what I was most proud of, and in addition to sort of navigating the challenges around that, those unexpected pandemic-related disruptions to the campus, I think actually what I'm really most proud of is the way that we were in fact able to keep an eye on the long-term goals of the college, even as we were navigating change in real time. So higher ed is not famous for navigating change in real time, I will say, and that we don't necessarily have the systems in place to always get that right. But we were able to put in decision-making processes that allowed us to have public health and community support systems that allowed for learning in person, and that was really exciting. But in addition, I was able to fairly quickly get us back onto moving forward with the strategic plan. And that's, for those listening who haven't been following the process, that's really a 10-year plan for Williams. So there are long and shorter term goals. But what's exciting to me, not even a year after publishing is that quite a number of initiatives are already underway, and that the key values at the heart of the endeavor are really guiding those initiatives. So I thought it might be helpful for our conversation just to highlight a few of those things. And as I say, this is a 10-year plan, so some things are well underway and close to being achieved. Others, we've started processes that lead to longer term goals. So first, I thought I would mention just work on the space of access and affordability. And Williams has historically really been a leader in this space. It's one of the things some of you have heard me say that attracted me to Williams was the profound commitment to meeting demonstrated financial need for talented applicants who were accepted into Williams. But one of the things we've been hearing for quite a number of years is that even as we meet demonstrated need, that true affordability for many families, high need families, but also middle income families, is really a challenge. And that is captured in the cost, but it's also really captured in some of the additional experiences that go with being in college. And one of those notably is, unlike when I was in college, the emphasis on how we use summers and winter study and those sort of out of classroom experiences to forward the lifelong learning and experiential opportunities that students have. So one of the things that has been really important to me is to try to level out the ability of students to take advantage of those opportunities so that they can really have the full 4-year Williams experience. And the most exciting thing we could do this year that I'm thrilled about is remove the summer earnings requirement out of take the summer earnings requirement out of students' financial aid package. So for those who don't know, all financial aid packages historically at Williams and everywhere has a component where students have to work in order to pay for their education, and they give some of that money back to Williams. And I should note that our students work. They work very hard all the time. They use that money for all kinds of things. But what we've done is freed them up so that those funds don't have to be given back to the college. And some of them can use those now freed up time. It's essentially a gift of time to do low paid or even no paid internships in civil service, or to explore or take another class or do the kinds of things that other Williams students are able to do in the summer. So that was something I was really excited about, but it is actually part of a longer term strategy to focus on this concept of true affordability. And I think we're going to continue to think about ways that we can really make it possible for students to take full advantage of the 4 years here, because our strategic plan is really thinking of them as students for 4 years, not for 8 semesters. So how do we make that whole experience one that is a useful one? And then on campus, of course, once here, so I mentioned access and affordability, but once here on campus, we're also really interesting in what are their first on their, of course, their learning and their education, and then what are the factors that they need to thrive while on campus. So focusing first on the educational component, the core mission aspects of a liberal education. We have a couple of initiatives we're moving forward. First, we continue to invest in faculty pedagogy and teaching, and we are building a teaching center to continue to provide resources for faculty to develop their craft after they come to Williams. Those faculty who teach at Williams are some of the most dedicated educators I've ever met at the higher ed level. And the teaching center is a space and place for them to come together to talk about new and best practices, to learn about the field of education and how it's growing, and to take some of these initiatives back into the classroom. And we had some early success just going into the pandemic, helping faculty think through how do you achieve your teaching aims in a remote landscape. But there's so much more that the teaching center can do, focusing and working with faculty on those skills and capacities as they grow. They too are lifelong learners. I like to think I'm consistently learning as an educator, and I know the faculty here are as well. As a side note, I'm hoping to teach again next fall. I have a course I'm developing, and I often think when I develop my own teaching that what makes it exciting to be an educator is to be consistently engaged, not just in the act of transmitting knowledge, but in learning oneself in the process. In addition, we are developing some key academic initiatives. On the one hand, we're putting a lot of effort into developing and strengthening what we're calling our technology and the liberal arts program, which is strengthening capacity in places like computer science and statistics on the one hand, while developing science and technology studies on the other, an interdisciplinary approach to thinking through how we learn and understand the use of technology in science and society, the ethics, the financing, the history, et cetera. And I think we are developing for next year a new data science course, which is an outgrowth of some of this work and some of the new faculty we've been hiring, and we will continue to grow in that area. And in addition, we're really doing a tremendous developing of creative capacities through our curriculum by a deep dive into strengthening work in both the creative and performing arts at Williams. Big component of a liberal arts education is thinking about the capacity of creativity and how we wind that through the curriculum. And at Williams, one of the places, not only, but one of the places that happens is it's our storied art history department and in the visual and creative arts here. We have an amazing teaching museum, and we are currently thinking about moving that to a new location, which will allow it to do the work it does in a more robust way, while freeing up some additional space for us to think about the strengthening and development of the arts on the Williams campus. And maybe in the question answer period, we'll have time to talk more about why that is so exciting and interesting. But I should just note that I have hardly yet met an alum from Williams who hasn't told me that one of the most important courses they took at Williams was in the art history department. And even later in life, talking about how that education and learning wound into things they not so much did later, but thought about and integrated into their worldview as they developed. And we continue to really think about our museum as a teaching space on campus, and much like science laboratories function in that way, continuing to expand and develop the kinds of learning that take place using artifacts and visual arts in our curriculum. And then I think the last two areas that I wanted to focus on is outside the classroom learning. What are the other components of our program that really allow us to focus on and develop students' ability to thrive? And one area that we've moved forward with quite intentionally this year is the Davis Center Initiative, which is a project focused on renovating and strengthening our multicultural center, which ensures that students from all backgrounds are well supported on campus, and that all of campus is well positioned to bring students together across difference. And those are two sort of different emphases in that program. The Davis Center does work in both of those arenas. We've been able, even despite the pandemic, to move that renovation and programming support project forward. The current Davis Center staff has moved out of the building so that we can start now doing that project. And I'm really excited by the tremendous support that has come from the Williams alumni community to help us reach the goals to building that building and to strengthening the program there, which has included the full support of all members of our board in moving that project forward. And in addition, as we focus to students thriving, you're probably hearing a lot these days about student well-being, mental health, and the kinds of challenges that contemporary students are facing, navigating the pandemic, but frankly, this predates the pandemic as well. And as part of the strategic plan, we do have a big focus on something called well-being, which is to say, on the one hand, strengthening and developing mental health support on campus, which is really important, but also beyond that, empowering our students with the core capacities they need to take care of themselves well as they continue to grow and develop their lifelong learning skills. And so this is really a project that focuses on the mind, but also the body. One of the things Williams does really well, I think, is that indoor-outdoor. I think of it a bit that way. The sort of you're a better thinker if your body is working well, and and vice versa. And so we're just in early days of moving the thinking forward on this part of the strategic plan. But it starts actually in some ways with thinking about the whole layout of our campus. So we're doing a study of space. And one of the things I've been asking in that study of space is, how do we sort of wind well-being through the campus? And you could imagine that in kind of physical infrastructure terms. I don't only mean that, but you can think of athletic facilities, but you can also think about mindfulness and the spaces and places in which people engage in that work. Or I have students talking about yoga studios. As we think about all the ways in which people take care of themselves inside and outside, that's some of what's going into that project. I know some folks listening are wondering, will Williams, ever renovate its field house? Yes, that's part of this too. But it's the broad thinking about that wellness component that's part of this effort. And I'll just end, I think, before turning it over to the questions, by noting that one of the most popular courses on campus right now is Bernie Ree's course on Zen and literature. I believe he's had 90 students in that class, both in the fall and in the spring. I think he caps it at 90. That just gives you a sense of the student hunger, I think, for thinking about sort of where cognitive science, the humanities, the brain, wellness come together. And there's actually a lot of wonderful research on this now. That class is just one way that we can help students think that through. So those are some of the exciting things going on right now that I'm really enjoying developing as we continue to navigate my senior year. So thanks for the great question.
Sure. No, Maude, thank you for the great response. And I think a lot for us to think about. And as I see a couple of questions coming through the Q&A, I'd love to encourage everybody to ask questions about what Maude's just shared, or other things that are on your mind, and we'll thread them into the discussion. So two came in that play off what you've shared. One is this idea that the Davis Center may be a space where we can really think about programming that addresses some of the divides in communities. And we have an alum who asked, how are we making sure that we market what's happening at the Davis Center so that all students know that it's a space that's available to them? And so maybe in much the same way that we try to market the museum as being a space that's available to all students with maybe different goals, but
Sure.
what's happening in that regard?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that Williams has done very well for decades now is bring a really diverse set of students together and to bring talented students from a huge variety of backgrounds to campus. But given that intense diversity, of course, it also stands to reason that once you're living together in a small community, there's work to be done to first ensure that everybody is sort of able to take full advantage of the program in some of the ways I've alluded to, but also to help provide folks with the tools to navigate those differences. And the Davis Center really does that work and is a resource already in that way for the campus. So I think of it less of it as a marketing effort and more as, or maybe I should put it differently, that the programming that the Davis Center does is directed to the campus as a whole. And I can give you some examples. There's obviously something like Claiming Williams Day, which is hosted out of the Davis Center, but which is for the campus. Classes are canceled. We spend the day studying and learning together about a variety of topics that affect society around issues of difference and use the day to think that through collectively. But also the Davis Center, for example, has a position in it that is focused on creating what we call in the business these days, inclusive classrooms. That is ensuring that students in the classrooms are well supported through the best advances in pedagogy to think about learning across all kinds of differences. So I can give an example for those of you who are not in education, educational work. One example would be something we call flipped classrooms. So flipped classrooms are designed to have students listen to lectures in some kind of remote landscape and then come to the class to use class time for problem solving, collective problem solving, hands-on problem solving with the professor. And the reason I'm using it in response to this question is that there's a lot of good research to show that classes that are taught in this way allow faculty to reach more students across all kinds of difference. All kinds of students thrive better in this kind of learning environment. So that kind of insight is brought into the community through our educator and inclusive classrooms who's seated in the Davis Center. So it's a resource for all faculty, for all students on the campus. Another example would be seminars and programs in talking across difference and also in restorative practice. After, when you have people living together of all kinds, no matter how they're different or similar, they tend to clash sometimes. It's one of the things that people do is they clash with each other. And then you have to figure out how you're going to repair that if you're living together and need to live and work together. And so the Davis Center does programming and that kind of work as well. So it's really directed to that, but it's also very much directed at supporting students from underrepresented background who need a place to be together because sometimes people thrive and learn better when they're in cohorts of community. Cohorts, I'm not sure cohorts of community is a real phrase, but when they're in cohorts or in community. And the Davis Center, through the Minco clubs, through support by really dedicated staff members there, through providing opportunities for students to work, to cook together or to study together, also provide support for those kind of cohort learning experiences that allow them to thrive.
Actually, this will be a good follow-up question to that then. I like cohorts of
community. Let's coin it.
Affinity. But speaking of that, could you talk about Tapsee Housing?
Oh, sure.
Question here that just says it's referred to in the strategic plan and give a little bit more insight. That would be.
So Tapsee Housing is something that emerged. It refers to theme, affinity, program, and I left out one of the words in the acronym, but it refers to program-based learning and living, where students can live and learn together in a community that they've constituted, where they have a faculty advisor and a staff advisor. And so where the theme or the issue that is bringing them together is something they want to be the focus of their living learning community for the year. In a sense, it's supercharging the residential life experience. You come to college to learn and live in a community that is entwined. Tapsee Housing allows students for a year to move into a program where they can focus on some areas of interest. So the first Tapsee house this year, for example, was a sustainability house where students who were interested specifically in what it would mean to live in sustainable housing and to teach and learn about sustainable housing through the year would come together to do that. And as I say, they have support from faculty and staff members. The students who came together in that house did not necessarily know each other. The program organizers put out the application. It was accepted by the housing office, and then they had students apply into it. And then those students, I forget how many were in it, but lived together for the year, still are living together, and did programming for each other and for the campus around sustainable living, cooking, all kinds of things over the year. So next year, there are a couple of others that are coming together. And what's around different themes. Sustainability houses, I believe, put in for a second year, and there are a few other themes that are being stressed for next year. And the key is you can apply to live in them if you have an interest in living and learning about that theme or affinity or whatever the unifying force is. So one really interesting one for next year, and this is sort of limited only by imagination and the ability to find a faculty advisor. So there's an interfaith house next year, which I found such a fascinating option of students coming together across different faith groups and thinking about what it means to have interfaith dialogue across those kinds of differences in a housing community and to support each other in that kind of community while also obviously experiencing some of the learning that comes from engaging those differences.
That's great. We're going to continue with that theme in some way. This idea of talking, through across divides of difference and background and opinion. One graduate says, from the outside, it seems to be an impossible bridge to divide because it's reflective of our national politics and other things happening. But how are you balancing that? And I'm going to combine that with another question, which is within the faculty, there seem to be more public ideological divides that we're seeing even as alums. And how do you talk about that as well or manage it?
Those are both great questions. I just want to actually though note that the language of that question, more divisions between faculty that you are seeing. I want to put the emphasis on that you're seeing. We live in an age where people live their differences in a public format in ways that was not true when you were in college. So the difference is not that faculty disagree with each other ideologically, I can promise you. The difference is that you are seeing those ideological differences in a way you didn't before. Faculty are famous for disagreeing with each other, both personally and ideologically. I'm a child of academics. I have lived my entire professional life in the academic world. And I don't just mean, you don't like each other because you tussled over someone you disagreed around hiring. I mean, really significant ideological divides between, different modes of ways of thinking and assessing evidence that can get and have gotten historically on campuses quite lively. So I don't actually think the debates are new. I think what's new is that now we have social media. So they play themselves out in a public way. That creates a different dynamic, and it is very challenging. There's no question about it, in part because it brings in so many more people who have opinions about what's being voiced and don't really know all the details, and nevertheless have very strong opinions. And that, I think, is really what is distinctive about the moment we're living in. I'm going to say something I have no evidence for, is really more of an impression, but I don't really think students are more political or divided than they were when I was in college. I mean, which is not to say that they are not now, it's that they were then. I mean, I remember late night arguments into the evening and school newspapers and demonstrations and all kinds of things in the 80s when I went to college. I think our students do those things now. Again, social media has added a component to it, which maybe changes both the impact, like you can't just think something for a day, it stays with you a lot longer now than when we were in college, where you could say something quite foolish and nobody would remember it 24 hours later. There's a little bit more of a paper trail now, in a sense. But the issues themselves and the range of debate, I actually don't think is that different in this day and age. And yes, though, the assumption at the base of the question is, sure, it's challenging. That goes back to why it's so important to have structures for thinking about how to navigate those conversations. I think Williams classrooms do it remarkably well. I think our faculty are very good at educating, as I mentioned, and I think they do a good job of having students challenge themselves and each other in ways that are productive and responsible.
Mm-hmm. Along that same thread of students challenging themselves in productive ways, how do you see students? One person asked a question, very thoughtful, about the need for people in all disciplines, but even perhaps STEM disciplines most of all, to be able to think really broadly and across disciplines, and how is the college encouraging that kind of intellectual cross-pollination and push to get out of your own field?
So first of all, thank you for that question. It's a great question. I'm going to answer it in a couple of different ways. The first is that actually undergraduates at Williams, maybe not only at Williams, but I think our students are particularly good at this, are much better at that than other people as they get older. So the older you get, the more specialized you get. And actually faculty are highly specialized, right? They think very often, very particularly about their own discipline. Sometimes they're in interdisciplinary fields that get them to think across discipline, but they're experts in something. And by definition, to be an expert in something, you start to narrow your focus. So I'm a historian, but if you ask me a question about, I don't know, medieval, Ottoman, or actually, let me not go down the rabbit hole of history, but if you ask me, about a period that I don't work on, I wouldn't be able to answer the question. But our undergraduates actually have a breadth of curiosity and a breadth of requirements that get them sort of almost automatically to study and ask questions across disciplines. We're lucky at Williams, we don't. So one very specific answer to your question, I don't think there's any major at Williams that's more than 10 courses. So if a student only majors in one thing, which is a big problem actually, but if they only major in one thing, they have 22 courses to study across the curriculum, which is itself a structural invitation for the kind of interdisciplinary breadth you're talking about. We also have quite a number, for a small college, quite a large number of interdisciplinary programs, which built into the program is, so I mentioned science and technology studies, but you could mention public health. We have a number of interdisciplinary programs that encourage students to take courses in either at least two, if not all three divisions. So that's certainly another way. The strategic plan itself, by focusing on technology and the liberal arts, is just that one example, is actually quite dedicated to the sort of core value that studying a topic without its surrounding topics isn't a fulsome way of studying it. So becoming a computer scientist is great, but becoming somebody who works on, I don't know, machine learning, who has also thought about the sociological and psychological and economic and ethical implications of machine learning, is I think at its heart of a liberal education. We are arguing that as a better educated person who's going to solve problems more capaciously and more thoughtfully. So there are tensions that push against this, and there's no question. We have lots of students now who double major, not because we're encouraging them to do so. I advocate actively against that, actually, but a lot of students do for reasons that have, I think, sort of what I think wrongly, but assumptions about what kind of impact that will have on their professional lives later. I don't actually think that your major is what determines your likely success after college, but I think students sort of sometimes think, two certifications of expertise is better than one. So that pushes against some of the breadth, but even then, there's breadth available. And often when students double major, they do it in, the fields that are actually quite distinct from each other. And so they can get some of the breadth even if they're double majoring.
Thank you. That's great. We're going to change gears. Could you talk about the recent decision to compensate JAs? I know for many of us, that was a fully uncompensated and time-consuming job.
Times change. It's hard to
compensated, not monetarily. Let's put it that way. But yeah,
so,
let us say a little more.
So I know we have years of Williams alumni out there from different years. If you're a young alum, you know that this has been something that JAs have been advocating for a long time. So this isn't I know not everybody thinks this is a good decision, but I will say it came organically from the JAs. It certainly hasn't been imposed by the institution. And really the driver behind the argument now for many years is that we want a diverse set of JAs to represent the diversity of the student population. And it's hard work to be a JA, as those of you who've done it know. And so students of high financial need who often had to do lots of other kinds of jobs, either to get through Williams, but also for some reasons of supporting their families and other reasons, have found it an impediment to participating, to not be able to have any kind of financial payment for the kinds of time they were putting in, because it's a huge time commitment. So they've been advocating for this for a long time, and ultimately we figured out a structure. I think the reason we held off for a long time is we were worried that if we started to compensate, that by making JAs employees of the institution, we would have to change the structure in some way that would be detrimental to that kind of peer-on-peer mentoring program. But we were slow and thoughtful, as academics are, and over time sort of figured out a way to structure the program that they could still, they're not 100% autonomous, but they're autonomous enough, I think, to preserve the key aspects of the project, of the JA project, while still making sure that we're allowing anybody who wants to be a JA to be able to afford to do it in this way.
That's great. Question here. I'd be interested in the strategic plan's call for taking restorative actions in response to the college's history. Could you comment on learning about the history first from this perspective to understand what actions are needed? So how are we going about?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Great question. Williams has a complex history, as all institutions of long duration have. And one of the wonderful things, I think, about the institution as it was founded is that it has the tools within it, built within it, to study itself. So what I mean, I'm a historian, so I can say that, the critical study of history is really one in which we want to think deeply about who we are, where we came from, and how those origins led us to where we are today. And then the question we asked about restorative, the question is, if there are aspects in the history that, as you're studying it, are shed light on aspects of the history that people are more critical of, or feel that don't reflect the values of the institution to this day, what can we do going forward that will allow us to feel good about the institution's legacy and where it led us? So the first thing to say about that, before I give a more specific example, is that I think we can feel really good about the institution's even ability to do this. In other words, built into the institution is this critical ability to assess itself. And that's something to be tremendously proud of. And in fact, is one of the gifts that came out of higher education over the last 200 years, and is itself, I think, restorative in a sense, that ability to be self-critical and to grow and learn from one's own past. But there are other things the college is engaged in to work moving forward with its mission in light of some of the history. So I think most specifically, I would just point to the relationship we've been forging with the Stockbridge Munsee Mohican tribe, which is currently resides in Wisconsin, but which has historical roots in Williamstown and a history of displacement from the region. And so one of the things that we've done is created a partnership with the tribe and opened, well, it's their office, but we provided them some space to open the historic preservation office here in town. And so they do work here and in the region, not just in Williamstown. But insofar as it is combined with our core mission, we have a number of student interns that work in that office and that have been learning about historical archaeology, repatriation of objects, political issues that affect the life and times of the tribe. And so there's a way in which our own educational mission is being reinforced by the partnership, and we are able to do some restorative work out of the college's history going forward. So that's a kind of an example of the things that are underway as we study Williams history.
That's great. Thank you. I feel like this is a test of your ability to jump from different topics to, with grace, which
we are generalists, college.
Yeah. So then we'll go towards admissions. So a couple of different questions have come up in the
Sure.
Q&A about admissions. One is about Biddy's parting gift to you, which was to eliminate legacy admission at Amherst. So just you're thinking about that. And then also, as we build a class and think about the future of Williams, what is the role of something like affirmative action? How do we think about the makeup of our student body? And what's your opinion on how Williams should look at that going forward?
Sure. Great questions. Admissions is endlessly interesting, I know, not just for obvious reasons, I think, but it's become a very sort of politically and sort of an interesting intellectual question, actually, at some very profound level, I think. So the admissions landscape across the country, of course, is in flux in lots of ways, and the question had some of that embedded in it. So on the one hand, yes, some institutions, including one just over the hill, has started to question the validity of legacy admissions going forward. And on the other hand, the Supreme Court has taken up the question of, or will take up the question of race and affirmative action in admissions. And in a sense, I think while they're rather different, I think both speak to a long tradition of thinking about how to do selective admissions in a certain sector of higher education. And so the simplest thing I could say in answer to this question is, this is an arena that's really in flux. And I often say when I'm asked that 10 years from now, things will look very different than they look now, but it's very hard to predict how they're going to change. Except I think in certain ways, I think we can, well, I won't speculate what's going to happen in the Supreme Court, but I think a lot of us have assumptions about what's going to happen there. As far as legacy admissions specifically, Williams doesn't have plans to do what Amherst has done. We have typically had, and I should say, as I often do, talking to mixed audiences of Williams alumni, that you listeners disagree with each other on this topic. There are certain topics that I hear from alumni on, and this is one where I've heard a huge range of points of view and not necessarily predictable in terms of age of graduation or background. It really does scan the range. So whoever's listening and whatever you think, you can rest assured that the person in the next box over probably thinks differently about the issue. Broadly right now, what I can say is legacy is one of the things that Williams looks at in the range of qualities and qualifications we look at when we assess whether a student is going to be admitted to Williams. It's not the most important factor. It is one of 14 actually, and not even in the most important bracket, but all things being equal, talented legacy students will have that noted as one of the factors we take into consideration. We let in some, we turn away many, but they are very strong applicants. And that is the most important thing I can say to the listening audience. Nobody is being let in who isn't an extraordinarily talented student who we predict will excel here at Williams. And if I have real concerns about the legacy debate, is that I sometimes fear that the students who happen to have that as one component of a very strong application process will start to feel as if they somehow got a kind of they're in for the wrong reason, a reason that isn't accurate, that actually they are very strong students and contribute a tremendous amount to our community here.
Thank you. I'm throwing too many two-part questions your way, but here's another one. With what's happening on the ground in the Ukraine, one writer said, when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis during my time, there was a 2-day seminar where faculty gathered and allowed students to talk about, what was unfolding in the world. And so that person is wondering if there is anything happening this week just for broader discussion among the community. And then maybe an extension of that, if Williams is really setting itself up to nurture thought leadership in big ways, how can the graduates of a small liberal arts college make a difference from the Purple Valley in something that is as big as a geopolitical conflict? So,
okay, that's quite a two-parter. Let me start with the first part. So my simple answer is I hope so. I was just in touch today with the chairs of political science and history, asking what, if anything, is happening to outside of the classroom. I know from my own life as an academic that I would have spent some time in my classes talking about the aspects of a situation like this that I could shed light on, or at least try to help students try to figure it out. But my understanding is that there is some programming that is being developed out of the history department. So to be continued, but I can't tell you yet what it is. But that is my sense. And it's important to do. I would agree with the questioner that that one of the things faculty can do really well is take a very complicated, complex geopolitical situation and at least start to break it down. What are the questions we should be asking? How do you make sense of the news when you're far away and don't know very much at all? How do you even understand and think about these large events out in the world? So I very much hope that that this programming I heard about today goes forward. The other question I'm going to answer, I hope modestly, which is to say, students sitting on the Williams campus today can't do much any more than most individuals can do in the day-to-day, other than the ways you already know. I think what we offer and why I am so enthusiastic about what I do for a living is we take really talented students and provide them with the tools and capacities they need to go out and make a difference in the world in whatever way and place and direction they want to, in their communities, in their professional lives, and more globally in certain circumstances. I'm sure you, faster than I, could reel off a few well-placed Williams alumni who over the years have, who are in places now to affect outcomes and conversations about this set of events, but it also all kinds of issues of our times that we're all grappling with. We need them out there. This institution is small, but it is mighty. It has a much larger footprint, and that is because of the combination of the talent that brings people here, the resources and support and education they get when they're here, and then the network that they connect with when they leave here. And those three pieces work together to ensure that wherever they go and whatever they do, they're going to be, if they choose to, be able to have a significant impact. And sure, the Ukraine, but I hope in climate science and public health and working on the issues we've been talking about, or whether it's race and difference, or whether it's restorative legal work, or any of the many issues, and from many professions and disciplines. It's I don't think one in particular, right? So that's what's exciting about the work, and I think we continue to do that well.
I feel like this is a good set of follow-ups to that, and as an educator too, I appreciate all that you just said, and also these two questions, which are, how does Williams intentionally then teach things like empathy and like listening, right? As we look to solve these problems, are there concrete ways that we are doing that?
I think there's a twofold way to answer that question. First, the structure and nature of the education itself is geared to that kind of empathetic learning. Of course, you could go through an entire college education and, with the exception of a certain requirements, presumably avoid the kinds of courses that would get you to do that. But broadly speaking, I think any course you take that teaches you the basic, how do you assess evidence and think about things from a variety of perspectives. Sometimes it's points of view, but sometimes it's different kinds of perspectives, is asking for your empathetic side of yourself to come out, to think about, well, there's this argument, but there's also that argument, and I have to grapple with that argument if I want to dismantle it. And that's actually empathy, even if in the end you're disagreeing, because you're trying to understand that other perspective, other way of thinking, other body of evidence. So I think the classroom in the liberal arts education, when done as it should be, is very important for that exercise in human empathy. But the other thing I would say is, in a residential liberal arts college, that residential piece, that out of the classroom piece, whether you're on a sports team or doing a Cap and Bells production, or you're singing in an a cappella group, or you're in a community service project working out of CLIA, you're working with other people on joint projects and you're moving them forward. One of the things I do here every fall is talk to some of the student leaders about leadership, what I've learned about leadership in my professional life, and and one of the things that I always stress in that conversation is that wherever you're a leader, whatever you're leading, if you're directing a small group or a small project, you're essentially engaging in the same sets of skills and capacities that I use when I'm leading the college: listening, asking good questions, helping people move barriers out of the way to solving collective problems, collaboration, frankly, stepping out of the limelight to let other people step in and work to solve the problems. Like there's a lot our students are learning day to day in their co-curricular activities here. And I just have to say, last thing about this, what we ask them to do in the dormitories, their first year entries, they're doing things that most of us don't do most of the time. They're walking into often a shared room, or certainly a shared hallway, with people from such a vastly diverse set of backgrounds. And then we're kind of walking away and we're saying, figure that out. Learn to live with each other, figure out, we provide resources. We have some staff on hand to help if there's conflict or challenges, but basically we say, you're here and you need to build a community together. They don't always get it right. They're not always empathetic. Neither are we, right? Like, who is? And so that's a lifelong skill that we're all working on all the time. But the very context and structure supports some of that education.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. This is a little bit more of a whimsical question. Somebody wants to know, you're a historian. What should we be reading? Do you have a book recommendation for us? Actually,
so what I've been reading most recently in the field of history is in my own field, because I think I mentioned I'm going back into the classroom in the fall. And so what I've been reading is, it's been quite a couple of years since I was immersed in my own field. So I'm planning to teach a course on colonialism and its impact on Jewish history. My field is modern Jewish history. And so I've been trying to read the recent scholarship in that field that I've missed in the last 3 or 4 years while I became a senior here in college administration. So that's actually a lot of the field, the work that I've been reading in as of late. So I don't know that that's of interest to my listening audience here, but if anybody wants a recommendation in that field, I've got a nice long list now that I can share.
We'll share that out. So as we think about sort of the pandemic, its impact, the classes of 20 and 21, and how it shaped the end of their time, do you know how anybody's doing? How has the real world been for those two classes, and what can we do to support them?
The ones who graduated, you mean? Well, I think the class of 2020, of course, it was very challenging several months right after the pandemic, and after in the pandemic, but as they graduated and moved out of here. The good news for both classes, the simple to answer is they're doing pretty well, and as a class, and that's because as those of you who are out there in the work world know, it's a buyer's market right now, or I guess maybe it depends who the buyer is in my sentence, but it's a good time to get a job is what I'm trying to say. So our students are actually doing pretty well out there right now as they navigate the transition from college to the work world. But what you can do, and I love that question, and some lovely Williams alum always ask that. So this is always the moment where I plug our eFlink, which is our alumni networking tool that allows current students to connect with alumni, but it also allows alumni to connect with alumni now for professional contact, but also mentoring. Sometimes I've had alum say to me over the years, I don't have a job to post, so I'm not gonna go there. But it's great if it leads to hiring somebody, but actually it's really a platform for mentoring, guidance, and advice. So if you really want to be a helpful resource to the class of 20 and 21, listing yourself in that platform and making yourself available for conversations and guidance and telling your path to someone who comes to you, that's really a great thing you can do.
That's great. And I will say, having done it, nothing will make you feel better about Williams than talking to current students.
That is so true. They are really fun to talk to, and very grateful to alumni. Yes. And that just might give me a minute here, since I'm talking about the wonderful Williams alumni community. If I could just take a minute to thank you, Kate, and all of the alumni who were involved in the bicentennial. We are in the year that we're celebrating co-education as well, the 50th anniversary of co-education at Williams. And so the combination of that celebration and our bicentennial, I think, has been a tremendous reminder of the power of not just a Williams education while you're here on campus, but its lifelong gift to, I would say, the world, but also to each other. And it's been wonderful it was wonderful to participate in the bicentennial. I'm looking forward to those celebration of women at Williams. And I wanted to thank you and the many people who worked with you to make that a huge success.
No, thank you. No, and thanks. So many of the people who did that work are with us today. So thanks again to all of you who joined us. Yes, well done. This is such a treat, and I feel grateful that you carved the time out for us. And I'm so glad that we had a couple hundred people join us today.
Always wonderful. Yes,
really
thanks
nice.
Everybody for coming. Hope to see you here soon.
We appreciate it. Yes. And hope that folks will get to campus, but also know now there are lots of ways to engage with Williams, even if you can't, which is nice. And I think that's something that we've all learned. So, so grateful. Please stay safe and stay well this spring to all of you. I think Maud and I will have one last session before I retire in June, and that will also be my 25th reunion, which will be exciting. So thanks so much for being here today.
Wonderful. Bye.